Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to the second part of our two-part webinar series on family involvement in the juvenile justice system. On behalf of the Mental Health and Juvenile Justice Collaborative for Change at the National Center for Mental Health and Juvenile Justice, thank you all for being part of this today. My name is Kathy Scoura, and I will be moderating the session this afternoon. Before we begin, I want to just go over a couple of housekeeping items, and for those of you who were on our first webinar, which was back a couple of weeks ago, I'm going to apologize right up front for there being some repetitive information, but we want to make sure that everyone who's new to the call understands how this is going to be organized. First off, we're using WebEx as the platform for the webinar today, and if at any point during the call you experience any technical issues, audio issues during the webinar, please feel free to use the chat feature, which should display on the right-hand side of your screen to ask for help. We have staff here who are poised to respond to any problems or difficulties. The webinar itself is scheduled to run for 1 hour, 60 minutes, and will include 2 presentations. We hope to have time at the end of each presentation for a couple of questions. And if you do have questions over the course of the presentation or discussion, please feel free to use the Q&A feature that also should display on the right-hand side of your screen to submit a question. If for some reason after the webinar you have a question about any of the information you've heard, you can submit your questions directly to us at the Collaborative for Change, and that web address is, or the email address, I should say, is listed on the third bullet of the slide. And finally, we will be posting the recording of this webinar along with the PowerPoint slides most likely within 5 business days on our Collaborative for Change website, which is listed on this slide. And we fully expect to review this contact information at the end of the webinar in case you miss it now. The last thing I want to mention is that we, as we did with the last webinar, will be posting several polling questions that should appear on your screen momentarily if they're not already there. And we would ask if you had a minute or two just to answer the couple of questions that we've posted. These are helpful for us, as I explained during the first webinar, to get a better sense of who's on the call, who our audience is for this event, and we hope to be able to report out the results in between the transition of our 2 presenters. I'd like to just briefly mention what the goal of this webinar is today. It's primarily to highlight examples of some of the family involvement and engagement innovations that were developed by the states that participated in the Mental Health Juvenile Justice Action Network. And in particular, we're featuring the work today of 2 states that were in that network, Washington and Illinois, who chose to focus on the development of more advocacy-oriented resources and models to help youth and families better understand the juvenile justice system and what they can expect, better understand their rights and responsibilities within that system, learn how to access important critical services, including mental health care for their children, and generally to become strong advocates, not only for their own children, but for all children. We have 2 presenters today, and I'd like to briefly introduce them. Our first is Dr. Sarah Walker, who is a research assistant professor at the University of Washington School of Medicine. Her research interests are in juvenile justice system reform with an emphasis on family engagement, cultural and gender responsive service, and mental health treatment and diversion. She facilitated the development of the parent support program, I should say, Juvenile Justice 101 in King County, Washington, which she'll be talking about today, and is now in the midst of replicating that program in 3 additional sites in Washington State using a community of practice approach. Dr. Walker has also been the principal investigator on numerous grants and projects evaluating the effectiveness of programs and policies within the juvenile justice system. Our second presenter, Matilda DeDeos, is a former program manager at the Children and Family Justice Center at Northwestern University School of Law in Chicago, where she co-authored the Know Your Rights curriculum, which again she will be talking about during her session. She was co-editor of Future 500, which is a directory of youth activism in the United States, and is a certified Advancing Youth Development course facilitator. She is a member of the Chicago Grassroots Curriculum Task Force, a member of the organization called Youth Struggling for Survival, and serves as co-chair of the Youth and Family Engagement Committee of the Juvenile Justice Leadership Council of Illinois. Matilda now serves as the Associate Director of the Free Right Jail Arts and Literacy Program, working with young people in juvenile detention in Chicago. So before I turn it over to both Sarah and Matilda, I wanted to spend just a moment providing you all with some context for how this work came about. Back in 2004, the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation launched something called Models for Change, which is a national juvenile justice reform effort that was created to develop replicable and sustainable models of juvenile justice reform in select states that could ultimately be adopted and replicated by other states who were basically struggling with the same kinds of issues. There were 4 states that were selected to participate in this project. Those states include Pennsylvania, Illinois, Louisiana, and Washington. And as part of a strategic planning process that those states had to go through, not surprisingly to us anyway, here at our center, all 4 identified mental health as a significant challenge to their juvenile justice reform efforts and something that they wanted to focus on as part of their Models for Change activity. That piece of information was not lost on the MacArthur Foundation, who used it as an opportunity to create an issue-focused network of states focused exclusively on mental health and juvenile justice reform. And this action network included the 4 states that have been selected as to be part of Models for Change, as well as 4 new partner states, which include Colorado, Connecticut, Ohio, and Texas, who worked with the Models for Change states from about 2008 to 2011, strictly around mental health and juvenile justice reform work. The network was coordinated by our National Center for Mental Health and Juvenile Justice, and during this time, the state teams worked together to jointly identify 3 priority areas that they wanted to take on as part of this effort. The first issue they focused on was that of early diversion, creating new and more opportunities for youth with mental health needs to be safely and appropriately diverted from the juvenile justice system to community-based treatment. The second project that the group took on was that of workforce development and creating new educational and training materials that targeted frontline juvenile justice staff to provide them with basic information on adolescent development and adolescent mental health. And if anyone is interested in learning more about those 2 areas of work, you can find extensive information on our Collaborative for Change website. And finally, the last project that this network took on, and the one that I would say unequivocally the group felt most passionately about and were most committed to, was the issue of family involvement. And the kind of background, I guess, and justification for why the group wanted to get involved with this was relatively simple. There was a strong sense that men really want to be involved with the juvenile justice system, but lack the system knowledge and the advocacy skills to be able to do that effectively. On the other side of the equation, with the fact that juvenile justice system staff are often very frustrated by their inability to adequately engage and involve family members in their work, and quite frankly, some juvenile justice system staff didn't really see the value of why that would be helpful and important. So our Action Network states decided that there were new resources necessary to do 2 things. On the one side, help juvenile justice systems and the staff in those systems recognize the value of working with families, of partnering with families, to help them better understand where families are coming from, at the same time working to improve their own individual engagement skills. The other set of states were interested in kind of focusing on the advocacy orient of this and providing new information and new resources to help family members and youth kind of improve their understanding and their knowledge of the juvenile justice system so that they can become more effective and engaged advocates. Okay, so with that, I'd like to turn the microphone and the stage over to our first presenter, Dr. Sarah Walker.
So I'm going to talk, today I'm going to talk about a specific program, as Kathy mentioned, with MacArthur Foundation support we facilitated in King County, Washington. It's a parent support model that's based in the court. So why court-based parent support? Well, the first answer to that is because that's what parents told us was needed. Before we started any development of a program for family support, we hosted a community-wide meeting that included veteran parents of the juvenile justice system and youth, and we talked about various modes of support or different ways that we could the community could help support parents to be more informed about the justice system or provide them with the resources they need. And when we started our planning process, we were thinking of something more along the lines of community-based workshops that would happen in kind of all around the county. And the parents who came to this meeting said, you know what, that would be great too, but where we need to start is at the court, because this is when parents are the most scared, the most concerned, and really when they have the least amount of resources throughout the whole process, because the court process is very legal, and they haven't yet been connected with other individuals who can offer support as the youth moves through other phases of the process. So just to back up quickly, one of the reasons for this is because the juvenile court was never really developed to support parents. That wasn't its role. In fact, in the initial iteration of the juvenile court, sort of the justification of the court was the invocation of this kind of legal term that transferred responsibility around parenting from the parent to the court, because parents were viewed as neglectful. And then as the court evolved and became less paternalistic and more of a legal court, parents still were not really better represented or supported or included in that process, because the legal rights of a juvenile court pertain to the youth and not to the parents. And one of the most common confusions of parents that I've talked to and that we've talked to in this process is that the defense attorney is really not there to help support the family. The defense attorney has a very specific role around representing the youth. So it's very confusing for parents who feel like they want to be there to help, to understand, and there isn't a very clear role for them right in the beginning. It kind of depends on the degree to which a judge might include them in hearings, but they're really not given a lot of information. So what Juvenile Justice 101 seeks to do is, from those very first encounters with the juvenile court with parents, to build an environment of trust and care. Because we believe, and we've seen, and later I'll talk about some research that shows that when you can build those, when you can build an atmosphere of care and trust from the very beginning experiences with the juvenile court, the parents will be, first it reduces their anxiety and their fear, and then increases their sense of confidence in being able to navigate the process, which has a lot of other really beneficial effects. So I'll talk a little bit about how this actually works. The way that the King County program is set up is that there's a family partner supervisor who's the director of the program, who I typically do these presentations with, but we were doing kind of one person, so that's fine. But Karen Traylor, who's a fantastic and passionate advocate for this work, is the director of the program in King County, and she supervises, it varies from about 6 to 7 family partners who are all veteran parents who have gone through the process with their own children, sometimes nieces and nephews or grandchildren, but have all kind of been through that process as a caretaker of the youth, who can empathize with the anxiety and the fear and the worry and the sadness that a parent might be going through. And then have also come out the other side, and they're able to communicate messages of hope. They're able to coach families on the ways to sort of interact with the court personnel and with probation, and how to talk to the judge. They also serve a really, something that evolved that we didn't really anticipate, is just their presence in the courtroom actually reduces a lot of the stress and the chaos, which I'll also talk a little bit more about. So the parent partners, they come in, right now they come in 4 times a week in King County, start setting up about 30 minutes before hearings start, and they just talk with families informally. And then they do a formal presentation that lasts about 20 minutes, where they show a video and they also talk just kind of what to expect, the roles of various court staff, what hearings are coming up, what they mean, and they answer questions. So some of the specific resources that were developed to support this project, the first one is a resource booklet. So this is a booklet that we developed in the context of a large work group that included court personnel, but also included families, mental health staff, and other advocates. And it was intended to be something that would directly address sort of the needs that families were telling us that things that they needed to know about the justice system, or that wish they had known about the justice system. And so it was developed to be something that people could write notes in. They could jot down when the next hearing dates were, and also provides examples of what you see here is like a probation log. So what kinds of information should families be keeping track of so that they can be helpful, and the conversations between probation and families can be really effective, and sort of prompting families to not only note the things that they're viewing as problematic, but also to note the strengths and the positive things. So there's also some support there around sort of noticing and reinforcing the positive things that their children are doing as well, in a time that can be really frustrating and parents may be feeling really burned out. We've done a number of surveys and asking parents about what they find useful. This is something that gets consistently really highly rated. And one of the reasons I think that parents find it really useful is because while they also note that being able to talk to a family member right there at the court is really useful, and I'll talk about some data and that in a moment, having something that they can take home with them and look through more at their leisure can be really helpful, because in the moment in the court can be kind of so stressful and so many things they're trying to process. Being able to take that home is really useful. And we've also heard from the probation managers and supervisors that parents are actually coming into probation meetings with these booklets. They are being used, kind of these working documents through navigating the kids' process in the system. We also developed a video, and the purpose of the video is to make sure that information that's presented is standardized. Particularly, you have a number of veteran parents who are coming in and out, and they do get about a 4-hour training before, and there's a background check and interview process and a training before they start working on site at the court. But having a video, sort of, particularly the defense attorneys and the judges felt more comfortable at having the information that was presented that was really standardized, so all the families got the same information. This is also available online. If you want, you can check it out on YouTube. If you just type in Juvenile Justice 101, it should be one of the first things that pops up. There's also kind of it's a little out of date, but there's a website, www.jj101.org, where you can also see this video. So this video is not super sophisticated. It was developed for less than $5,000, but so that's kind of a message of scrappiness, and you can do it too. And you know, it's served a great purpose. It's now been used for about 4 years. So we're now looking at some updating it and maybe doing something a little different with even shorter videos that are on specific topics that families and youth can kind of consume themselves, that can be online. It could also be linked to QR codes that can just be read on smartphones. We're trying to think about ways to make this even more accessible. And then the other thing, as I mentioned, that veteran parents do is they go and they just talk with families in the lobby. So there's a lot of one-on-one outreach. Are there questions that I can answer? The veteran parents never talk about the case. So they're very clear with the families about that. If the families or parents start to talk about their case, the parents are trained to say, you know what, I want to support you, and I know this is a really overwhelming time. I can't talk about your case because I don't want to ever be brought into court to talk about it, but I can definitely help help you know where to go, what the process will be like. One of the ways that the director kind of keeps track of this and what the veteran parents are talking to people about are through these log sheets. So these were developed to be pretty quick and easy for the family partners to fill out. It's a record of all of the interactions that they have on court. So it serves a quality assurance process. It's also been really useful in our ability to go back in and see what the family partners are helping with and what they're talking to families about, which also informs there are bi-monthly booster sessions that all the family partners attend, and the kinds of questions that they're getting and that are coming up in court are often used to inform what those booster sessions will address, and additional information that the family partners get trained on. So I'll talk a little bit about some of our evaluation activities of this program, and then I'll talk a little bit more about implementation and funding. We've now done a process evaluation and just talking to families who have experienced this court support program, and also did a controlled study where we, which I'll talk about on the next slide a little bit more, where we actually talked to parents who didn't experience JJ 101 and parents who did, and saw how something changed over time as a result of that. But this right here is just for parents who experienced JJ 101 and asking them to rate their experience in the court as a process of care agency. So process of care is a term that's being used more in the literature to describe health agencies that have a family-centered focus. So the degree to which health agencies are paying attention to what the family needs, or they're treating families like their concerns and needs are important and value their input. And we took this measure that of process of care in health agencies and adapted it for the juvenile court, because there is no existing rating tool for family involvement or family-centeredness for juvenile courts. So we went ahead and made the questions relevant to juvenile court. And we asked families, we wanted to figure out, is actually talking with a family partner improve their experience of the court? And so as you can see here, there are multiple domains in which it did. Talking with a family partner helped parents feel more confident. They got more written information. There was a more of a caring atmosphere. To some degree, they felt like the needs of their whole child was being more addressed. They felt like they got more explanation about the court process. They had more opportunity to ask questions. They felt more treated as an individual. And so those were the domains where those differences were most apparent. And it reiterated to us that there really is value in having that extra support person there on site who's had that experience with the juvenile court and can offer that kind of support as something that otherwise families would not be getting. So as I mentioned, we also did a controlled study of Juvenile Justice 101, and it was small. We had about 10 people in our condition who got all of Juvenile Justice 101, which included the video and the on-site court support and the resource booklet. And then we did we did over a period of time, a day where we only showed the video. When we were talking with folks about kind of on-site court support activities that you could do, there was a lot of interest in providing something and a lot of questions about, well, can you just do a video? Can you just have more information? And we didn't know, like, what is the added value of having, people actually walking around, because it's a lot more complicated to organize that and supervise that. And so we went ahead and had a day where you just had a video. And then we also had a day where there was nothing. And so on all those days, we went in and we asked people to fill out surveys right then and there before hearings started and before any court support was going on or any videos were being shown. And we asked them to tell us a number of things, including the sense of their perceptions of the court, and that included domains of mistrust, which we took from an existing measure of parental perceptions of the court that measured the degree to which parents thought that the court was going to treat their child fairly and that they were going to get a kind of a fair shake, and And then also the parent's sense of self-efficacy and being able to navigate the court, and that the outcome of the court, the outcome of the process would be okay, and that that they're, you know, that they would know what to do, and that they were feeling more positive about the process. So you can see here sort of the result of that. On days where there was nothing, on kind of regular days, our control day, you do see just a decrease in mistrust over time and a slight increase in self-efficacy, which makes sense when you're first experienced, you're really overwhelmed and you're really scared. You know, the court staff that are there are good and they care, and so you would expect over time to just see a decrease in mistrust and an increase in self-efficacy because you know a little bit more what's happening. What was interesting with the full JJ 101 is we saw the same decrease in mistrust. It wasn't different from getting nothing, but there was a significant improvement in self-efficacy and the feeling of the parents that they knew what was going to happen, what was going to go on, and that their kid would be more or less be okay. We didn't see that same improvement on the video-only days, and really there was no difference between showing the video and doing nothing. And so added to the previous data on the benefit of that on-site court support for parents in a process of care environment, this further supported the value that having those conversations with parents can be in helping parents feel more confident navigating the court. These are just some qualitative feedback about the impact of this. Court services staff really enjoy this program. They not only do they have to field fewer questions, similarly for the defense attorneys have to field fewer questions, but the atmosphere in the lobby is improved. And on more than one occasion, because of the family partners that are serving this program are from this community, there's been instances where they've actually been able to help kind of soften and even mediate some tension in the court between families who were there for kind of different sides of a case. You can also see some of the things that both parents and youth are saying about the benefits of the program. So while the materials and the focus is kind of written more towards parents than youth, this is just a court-based program. It literally runs in the lobby with the orientation and everything. And there are as many youth as parents who sit through this. So youth are also benefiting from this information, as you can see from this slide. So just some quick mention around a development process and how we're replicating this now in other courts. So the fundamental value of this program is that it needs to be localized to the family's needs in whatever jurisdiction you're serving. So this is not at all intended to be kind of a manualized approach that just gets dumped down into any jurisdiction. So one of the first things to do is a needs assessment. What are the families in your area struggling with, and how can the court sort of put resources in place to support that? The other fundamental value is that the planning process has to include parents, preferably parents who have had those veteran experiences in the juvenile court, so they can help the court staff and other community partners sort of interpret and give feedback on any resources that get developed. After doing the needs assessment, or in conjunction with doing the needs assessment, all of the development of whatever gets put in place needs to happen through an oversight committee meeting that includes, or at least updates, all of the various court staff and players. Because when you're working in the court environment, you're working in other people's turf. And, we had to do a lot of sort of discussion with defense attorneys who are often pulling families out right in the court lobby as they're getting ready for hearing. So how does that work when you are running an orientation right in the middle of court? So we needed to make sure that there was space for both of that the defense attorneys saw this as valuable and could support that kind of now, frankly, inconvenience around their usual operations. Similarly for the judges and getting everybody on board. after doing the needs assessment and then having this process where you figure out, okay, how are we going to localize these materials and what kind of supports are we going to put in place, you do your actual materials development and then start recruitment and training. So, I hope I've communicated that there's real value in considering having actual veteran parents be a part of this and providing on-site support. And so that requires some community outreach that, some courts, at least in my experience, have wanted to do and may not have been particularly successful in doing yet. And what's been exciting to see in our replication efforts are the increased collaboration now with agencies in the community who are doing family support and are so excited to be able to partner now with the juvenile court around that, and that's been really great to see. And then doing kickoff and implementation, which I'll talk about. So a couple other thoughts about needs assessment. In King County, our needs assessment came about through that community meeting that we did, but there's a number of ways that you could do it. So a couple of the other sites have done surveys in court, and this is an example of half of the page of one of the surveys where they just it was a two back and front survey, not too hard to implement, and gave a really good snapshot on where they're at. So you can see here in the graph, they separating the questions out by whether this was a family's first experience with the juvenile court. You can see that the green bar are those who that was their first experience. They're much less satisfied than those who had been there before, which again, sort of speaks to the need for having those services right in the beginning. This is a picture of the kickoff that we did in King County, and again, the importance of this was because this support program was now going to be such a visible part of court process. We wanted to make sure that everybody was involved with that, and so we actually brought in food, and we did a presentation, and we had the family partners talk, the judge talk, the defense attorneys talk, so it was great, a really good start to the program. So a few notes about funding and sustainability. So the operating budget in King County, which includes the director's salary, who's employed at about, I think, 25%, and then the family partners who get stipends at $17 an hour, and typically work, each one, they rotate through. So I think it's probably a total hour outlay of a week of about 10 hours for the family partners, with some printing costs and travel costs and a little bit for operations. The way that King County does this is they just subcontract to a parent support organization. So it's a totally autonomously run program that just operates in the court, and then they just communicate back and forth a lot about how things are going. There's quarterly, continuing quarterly oversight meetings to make sure that that's smoothly operating within the court. But it's great that it's this autonomously run, parent-led initiative. As I mentioned, Models for Change paid for the startup funds, so basically paid for my time and my colleagues' time to help facilitate the development of the materials and to do some initial pilot testing. But then we were able to secure local funds through the United Way, which paid for another year of support. And now the court is supporting it through court improvement funds and looking to actually just incorporate it into their annual budget. As I mentioned, we're now replicating in 3 counties, and all 3 counties are looking at different sources of support. So one county actually received an Annie E. Casey grant that's now going to fund their startup. Another county is looking at county funds that are dedicated to mental and behavioral health through family support organizations to fund the program, and the other county is still identifying options for funding. So that's it, and I'll look forward to answering questions now or later.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. That was a great presentation. We did get a few questions from some of our listeners. Unfortunately, we're kind of running a little short on time, so what we can do is post those questions on our site and provide the answers, and those will be included along with the recording of the webinar when we get that up in a few days. Now I'd like to turn the conversation over to our second presenter, Matilda.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm really excited about this conversation, and thanks so much for having me. Again, my name is Matilda DeJos. I used to be with the Children and Family Justice Center at Northwestern University, where we hosted the Know Your Rights Project. And my presentation will kind of go over the methods that we use to develop the curriculum and some of the outcomes that we experienced in the last couple of years. I'd like to start by also sharing that prior to developing the curriculum, there were a series of focus groups and conversations with youth and community organizations, practitioners, their family members, and the young people that they served. The Family Engagement Advisory Committee participated in the development of the graphic novel, which was a comic book style zine that was geared for young people to understand their basic rights and responsibilities with interacting with law enforcement from the street, in the schools, to the courts, their probation officers, while they may be in detention, thinking about reentering into community and afterward. And so it was really a difficult task, to figure out a way to instruct young people about the best ways to advocate for themselves throughout the entire juvenile justice system. But they were able to develop this graphic novel and then also created a family guide for parents in both Spanish and English to be able to understand the basics of the juvenile justice system in Illinois. They engaged artist Elgin Bukhari T. Smith, who also works with youth in detention, to provide the illustrations, and then graphic designers were able to translate, legalese and complicated information into the most basic how-to language for parents to understand how to advocate on behalf of their families and for their young people. So in the process of developing both the zine, the resource guide, and the curriculum, we really had to go to the groups who had a history with engaging community members or who had experience working on legal education. And so the Bloom Legal Clinic was the place that hosted us, and of course we got access to the expertise of legal defense attorneys who work with both young people and adults. First Defense Legal Aid is a local resource here in Chicago. They provide free legal assistance for anyone in police custody, in Chicago police custody. And so they were instrumental to our ability to provide Know Your Rights trainings for young people and families. As far as I know, and I can stand corrected, and if people want to add this in the Q&A or the comment section, my understanding is that First Defense Legal Aid is the only kind of organization in the country that provides, legal assistance for young people and adults in police custody before they are charged. And so they're a nonprofit group of volunteer attorneys, but I can't say enough how important it was for us to be able to extend this resource in our workshops and in our curriculum. The Center for New Leadership in New York has done Know Your Rights workshops and worked extensively on the Stop and Frisk campaigns. A local organization, Circles and Ciphers, engaged young men who were in conflict with the juvenile justice system. And from there, we were able to recruit young men and young people to participate as facilitators and curriculum developers that we'll talk about later. The following organizations, the Austin Coalition for Youth Justice, Cook County Juvenile Justice Task Force, Free Right Jail Hearts, Mandel Legal Clinic, these are all local Chicago-based organizations that work directly with young people in conflict with the law and have connections with their family members. And so these community-based organizations and resources were also instrumental to our ability to really reach the family members that we felt like would be the most disenfranchised or also, quite honestly, the most skeptical and mistrustful of the juvenile justice system. School of Unity and Liberation, SOUL, is a political education group out of California, and their curriculum is really user-friendly and incorporates the experiences of the participants. So we've modeled much of our curriculum based on their style, maybe not so much the content, but certainly the style. Center of Change is another youth group that was here in Chicago and has been working for the last 15 years on juvenile justice issues. Project MIA is also an organization here out of Chicago that looks at criminalization of young people and families. And the W. Hayward Burns Institute, the Community Justice Network for Youth, provided a really great set of resources for us. They have curriculum that's looking at youth in the U.S. justice system. It's a history of juvenile justice in the United States, spanning, going back to 1500. And they also have a really unique toolkit that they use to address racial disparities. think the most recent name of it is Julie Through the System, and we adapted that curriculum and incorporated it for the state of Illinois in accordance with the Juvenile Court Act, and we're able to incorporate that into our curriculum, and so that's one of our modules as well. And the Westside Health Authority is a community-based organization. But I really wanted to spend extensive time talking about the resources in the community because, quite honestly, we would not have been able to approach the Know Your Rights Project in the way that we did without looking at the assets and the strengths of the community-based organizations that already exist here, primarily in Chicago, but certainly in other, bellwether model states. Right? So the publication and distribution of these zines was expensive. The copies and boxes were shipped to juvenile justice courts all over the state of Illinois, probation officers, community centers, and schools and detention halls all had copies of both the zine and some of the parent guides, although we printed only 30,000 copies of the parent guide because it is expensive to print. But certainly the zine, we wanted to be able to make sure that young people could have that publication in hand and know that they were allowed to ask questions of what was happening in their proceedings. When we called and followed up with those recipients of the shipments of all of these publications, they really said that they wanted to have an experience of learning the content in these publications. They wanted a speaker to come out or even have like theater-based workshops so that their young people could really understand what the behaviors were that were necessary so that they could avoid the juvenile justice system altogether. And so this posed an opportunity for us to really think about how to translate both advice, right, legal advice or, advice about how to interact or how not to interact with a police officer into opportunities that are, role-playing, skits, creative arts opportunities for young people and also their families to really understand how to, quite honestly, just stay away from the juvenile justice system if that is at all an option. And so this very colorful grid here, I'll try to go through with detail so that you can understand what's in all of these boxes, right? So this is the process by which we were able to develop the curriculum and the content that's in it that we really felt was most important to deliver in these workshops. So we used the print resources as a guide, right, to develop the curriculum. We wanted to make sure that we were having a comprehensive curriculum. We convened gatherings for people who were directly impacted by the juvenile justice system to be co-creators of the curriculum and to also help us identify the solutions that had worked for them or perhaps, quite honestly, lessons learned. We wanted to use a strengths-based approach. Quite often, the risk assessment instruments and the different forms and surveys that family members and young people are asked to respond to can identify the risks and the negative characteristics or the different kind of traumas that they may have experienced, but we really wanted to understand what were the set of tools that built their resilience to be able to withstand and avoid the system altogether. So it was really important that they also be invited to talk about strategies that work to avoid police contact or strategies that may have worked to navigate successfully out of and remain out of the juvenile justice system. We also wanted to make sure that whatever current and ongoing community advocacy efforts existed at the time, we developed this project between 2012 and pretty much the summer of this year. We wanted to make sure that the conversations we were having in classrooms and workshops was relevant to what communities were experiencing with regard to criminalization in general, but juvenile justice contact in particular. So we incorporated some calls to action during our workshops, like, if there's an opportunity to voice your opinion on a bill, or if there's an opportunity to attend a local community policing meeting, we would add that information in as long as it was relevant to what we were talking about in the workshop. We engaged young people and parent leaders to develop the activities so that they would really be able to utilize that time and make it beneficial to them. And we wanted to also make sure that we understood what questions they had about the system based on their own experiences. And oftentimes when you look at a system or you maybe an advocate within the system, sometimes it's easy to overlook what the real snags in the system are, or the controversies or the conflicts that young people and their families are having. So we wanted to make sure to be a solution-oriented have a solution-oriented approach in our curriculum development. We also had some difficulty with making sure that the real-life situations of people weren't adding to, how do I say this? We wanted to make sure that people felt comfortable to share what their experiences were without necessarily divulging in personal and private information about their potentially open case or, you know, a specific case. So we wanted to create a framework wherein people could ask concrete questions that were useful to them, but also, you know, be in a space where they were safe, right? So we also created a resource guide at the end of the workshops to hand out to people so they knew who to call for legal assistance, for example. I'll get back to that in a moment, but as far as engaging youth as advocates, you know, like I said, we were engaging with community-based organizations and schools who had a track record of engaging young people and their families. And so we went back to those organizations after we had asked them initially what they wanted and what they needed to learn about with regard to publication. We went back to those organizations and asked them if they had young people and family members that they thought would be good candidates for engaging in this advocacy track as participants, as curriculum creators. And so we interviewed them and hired them on as part-time roles as researchers, educators, advocates, and they developed curriculum, and also would engage social media as a way to advocate on behalf of a certain issue or educate their own communities about who to call or when in police contact, and who to call if they needed to try to find an attorney. And it was really important that we engage, again, you know, people who had been directly affected by the system, because, in fact, they're the best leaders of whatever juvenile justice reforms we're going to be able to move forward. So I'm going to skip a little bit ahead just due to time. We used Project NEAR and First Defense Legally to develop the report, and so our approach was data informed. We identified the neighborhoods that had the highest level of harassment, police contact, and admission to the juvenile detention centers and the system overall. And so we're able to identify which communities to do outreach in. The Know Your Rights curriculum for young people comprises of 5 chapters that are all kind of expandable and adaptable activities. And so they span the interactions with local law enforcement, young people's rights in schools, understanding the juvenile justice system overall, which is where we borrowed the Burns Institute curriculum around the juvenile justice system. We have a workshop around reentry and expungement, community engagement, and then we really just capped it off with a juvenile justice Jeopardy game, which is the final chapter. The parent workshops are also adaptable. There are 3 chapters: advocating for their young people's rights in the juvenile justice system, navigating the system, and identifying the mental health issues commonly experienced by young people. We found this one to be especially helpful because parents oftentimes would just say, you know, we don't know what's going on with our young people, but in fact, if they understood the mental health of their young people, they were better able to communicate with their attorneys and come up with maybe better alternatives than admission into the system. One of our principles for communication was that really our workshops are informed by experiences, right, which is something I went at length on before. So we really just wanted to make sure that people were understanding there was a confidential space, so we asked folks to use the name of a friend or change the details, identifying details of a case, but then we would invite them to ask questions about scenarios, what to do in this situation with contact with law enforcement, et cetera. There's some workshop modules, essentially, you know, like the picture indicates, we really tried to set up most classrooms in a circle dynamic. We didn't want to create this false authority of us as purveyors of knowledge, when in fact, it was much of our conversations were so enriched by the fact that people had had direct experiences with law enforcement. Some of the educators that we worked with were able to engage their students, right? And so one of the teachers whose class we went to developed zines, like little Know Your Rights zines. And these are the pictures you're seeing are a ninth grade art project. As a result of our workshops, they developed these expandable zines to inform their friends and community members. And so it was really great to see how educators were able to take the information and use it to their, whatever their advantage or requirements are for Common Core standards that we're seeing here in Illinois, and make it relevant to their young people. Also, one thing that I'd like to add is that we also had young people create a song, a remix of a song that's actually kind of has a negative message. The young men from Circles and Ciphers and the audio engineer from Free Right Jail Arts created the 10 Street Law Commandments, and we used that in our workshops a lot. And so it's, it's a 2-minute and 31-second song, and young people created it, and it's advice about how to stay out of the system, and so we would utilize that as well in our workshops. So some of the highlights, just to sum up, we engaged over 5,000 people through our presentations and interactive workshops. We're still receiving requests, although our funding has dwindled, and people are still downloading the curriculum that's available on the website that's at the end of the slide. Young people are also making really meaningful connections with each other beyond the scope of the workshop. And young people and families coming together really helps to develop an understanding about the generational challenges that people are, experiencing. For example, parents who might not understand necessarily the level at which young people are in conflict or in contact with law enforcement. That those conversations are starting to emerge so that there's more intergenerational understanding. And we've translated the parent curriculum into Spanish to make sure that we're reaching all communities. Obviously doing Know Your Rights work is imperative. It gives young people a sense of efficacy. Certainly they can make better choices when they know that they cannot read what's inside of a police officer's mind. And so our project really focused on street-based and school-based interactions with police officers and security guards. We spent a lot of time focusing in on that, and we understood that oftentimes young people will make the best choices in their given situation, but they really started to understand that they could not choose what the law enforcement officer's actions were. They could only behave in a way that controlled their own behavior. And so it's quite difficult given, the state of events that we have with police interactions, but there certainly is a necessary thing for young people to understand that they really do have the right to remain silent. And this is something that, just needs to continue. So thank you so much for the opportunity to share. I'm hoping that we have a couple minutes for Q&A. And we'll be out here doing this work. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Matilda. That's amazing work. You guys have done such a great job in Illinois. So happy to share it here today. We do have a couple minutes left before we break. And Sarah, there was a question that came in for you that asked specifically about how you funded the materials that you produced through JJ 101. I know you talked about how much it cost, but you want to talk a little bit about how you fund that?
So I'm assuming that refers to the resource booklet. So that cost is just incorporated in the cost for operating the program. They're about 40 cents to reproduce. We made them intentionally easy, inexpensive to reproduce. So those just make up part of the budget through the court improvement grants.
Okay, great. Thank you. So we have a minute or so before we end. I just want to use this closing slide to remind people that the recording for this webinar and all the slides will be posted on the CFC website within the next 5 days or so. We did get a number of inquiries during the course of the webinar asking if the slides would be displayed, and yes, all of the slides will be displayed, and we'll also try to get to the responses to one other question that came in that we didn't have time to answer here today. The other thing I'd like to direct people to is our Collaborative for Change website. Under the Resources tab, we have a whole section of information, documents, materials, great resources on this issue of family involvement that not only our Action Network states and the Models for Change states developed and contributed to, but just other random pieces that really provide a nice comprehensive look at this issue. And finally, I'd just like to offer, if anybody has any questions as a result of this webinar that they think of tomorrow or the next day, please feel free to email us if you have a particular question for either Matilda or Sarah. I know that their contact information was displayed a minute or so before, but we can certainly be in touch and forward inquiries directly to them if you have questions about either the Know Your Rights initiative or JJ 101. So I'd like to thank both Dr. Walker and Matilda DeDeos for amazing presentations and all the good work that they're doing in Washington and Illinois, and how we hope so many other jurisdictions and states can benefit from this good work that you're doing. And finally, I'd like to thank everyone on the call who took an hour out of your day to spend with us to learn about this important topic. We're thrilled to be able to do this. We hope the interest in both this webinar and the earlier webinar will give us grounds for doing more work in this area. So thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.